Alright everyone, I want you to bear with me for a second and imagine you just downloaded a weird goblin game from Steam that looked somewhat interesting. It opens up to a montage from the player's eyes. You see around you a family, no, a village of goblins. You're a goblin. You're growing up, having fun with the other inhabitants, learning how to grow crops and care for animals, basically just having a peaceful life. Everything is calm and... Oh no, what's that? There's a dramatic shift as a band of human heroes enter the town. Much like a typical D&D party, they contain a squad of various adventurer-looking people. They're bombarding the town with spells and cutting down goblins left and right, burning buildings to the ground. Some goblins run, some will be taken, and some, including you, manage to hide. The leader of the troop, a man adorned in golden armor, takes one last look in disgust at the wreckage of the goblin glade before motioning for his soldiers to head out and continue their rampage elsewhere. The screen goes black and the player is now in control. So that right there is what I've had planned for months already. Bad, scary humans attack goblins, goblins have to fight back and clean up. Nothing super crazy there, but we're now at the point where we need actual detail. We need backstory, motivations, character personalities, basically everything that will bring this world to life. And in order to do this, I need to have a very solid idea of how the gameplay will go, so I focused on that first. We know this game will be about farming, raising livestock, cleaning up the island, and rescuing your buddies. But how does the player know what to do next without feeling like they don't have options? How do we pace it so it isn't too easy or too hard? How do we give enough tasks that they feel like they can do what they want without feeling like they're just going down a checklist of jobs? Well, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and coming up with what I think will work best. I can't address every aspect of the mechanics in this video, but I can go over the very basics here. First off, I decided the island will be split up into a few zones. The starting zone will be the goblin glade that we begin in, and the others will remain a secret for now. Since I made it so you have to walk off the map in order to go from area to area, each zone is naturally split into sections. I've decided that some of these sections will have human outposts where the invaders have set up. An outpost will be something like a factory, maybe a ship, could be anything. This outpost will be actively corrupting the surrounding area. Maybe a factory made a goopy mess, while a camp has filled a lake with litter, whatever it may be. The player will need to enter the outpost, which will act like a mini dungeon, and beat the boss and puzzles in there to shut it down. Once the outpost is cleared, it will revert to whatever natural landmark or building it was before the humans took it over, and the player will need to clean up the surrounding section to advance. Once the player has cleared out the final layer, which is where one of the main heroes is residing, well, something will happen. Once the player manages to beat all the heroes in all the zones, something else will happen. I hate having to avoid talking about it, but I really don't want to spoil anything about the main story. Okay, so the player will be exploring zones, gaining abilities that allow access to new zones, and slowly getting stronger. You may recognize this format of locks and keys from Metroidvania games like Hollow Knight or, well, Metroid. You'll sometimes find a lock of sorts that you need a certain ability to get past, like when you get the super speed in Metroid that lets you run through some walls. Whatever it may be, it allows me to gently steer the player around and prevent them from entering a zone too early that they aren't strong enough for yet, without them feeling like I'm babying them too much. So now that we know what the player's goals and day-to-day activities are, it's finally time for content creation. I started with making NPCs, and it was a very fun process. I ended up using my same strategy for D&D NPC creation because that's what I was comfortable doing. I did the following steps. First, come up with some of the strengths and flaws. Maybe they're very physically strong, but super cowardly. Maybe they're very sweet, but that makes them a total pushover. It may also help to come up with a bit of personality here. Maybe they're very blunt and rude, but still mean well. Maybe they seem super amicable and nice, but are really judgy of others once they open up. Next, I try to give them some sort of physical or non-physical quirk to make them more interesting. Maybe they have a mechanical eye, stutter a lot, dress super emo, I don't know, just anything that makes them less boring. At this point, we've got a pretty decent idea of their personality, so we can give them likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams, and of course, a name. This is where I like to draw them out so I can take a look at them and really imagine what it is they like to do. This is also a good time to define their relationships with other NPCs to help create a bit of potential drama. And that's pretty much my process for making NPCs. I may not go into as much detail for NPCs that aren't as important, but this is what I did for the first 12 dateable ones. Here's everyone I've made so far. I won't go into all the details on all of them, but I tried to make them as fun and interesting as possible, so we'll see how that goes later on. Now that we've designed some of the NPCs, we need to draw out the starter area. We're going to have a little town area, a place for the player house, and then the rest of the surrounding forest. I like the sound of a beach zone, a lake zone, and then maybe a couple other unique points of interest that serve as foresty landmarks. I drew up a few of the human dungeons as well and placed them throughout the map. I've only ever designed dungeons for tabletop RPGs, and this was a bit different since it needed to go nicely with my weird turn-based mechanics. I did some reading and found some resources explaining some good things to keep in mind while designing dungeons. I also found a huge list of video game puzzles that are common throughout games. Like, it literally just lists tons of different ideas for different puzzles. Perfect for if I start to run low on ideas, at least for some inspiration. I don't want to take a ton of time here and may make a separate video explaining how I did it, but for now I'll just say that I've come up with some interesting ideas for at least some prototype dungeons. This is one of those things that I'll just have to see how it goes once it's playtested, but I think the designs are solid for now. Okay, I'm now going to take a hard pivot and dump my most recent problem on you. Well, it's not really much of a problem, I'm just kinda dumb and hadn't really worried about it until now. I highly suggest that if you're working on a similar project, you knock it out as quickly as you can and learn from my mistakes. But before I dive into that, it's time for a quick shameless plug. Make sure you go check out the old game on Steam and hit that wishlist button to keep in the loop on when the game actually releases. It'll tell Steam you like me and hopefully boost me up a bit when the release date comes. And of course, subscribing, liking, and all that junk on YouTube really helps out too. But anyways, on to my next big issue. Localization. I kinda imagined that translation wouldn't be that difficult, but it was a bit more than I'd anticipated. First off, your font probably doesn't support every language and will just show a bunch of boxes whenever you try to show a Japanese character. How will you change the font of every text object whenever you change language? There's text all over the place, and you'll need every single instance of text to change font whenever you change the language. And what happens when the language goes from right to left instead of left to right? And what if in one language the text fits the box, but in another language it's really long and leaks out? And say you have something like this. In English you can just swap out the desired item name depending on what it is, but in, say, Spanish, the rest of the sentence may need to change depending on the gender of the item. As you can see, I was caught off guard by the amount of work to be done here, and it took an embarrassing amount of time to revert everything I've already done to use the new system. But luckily I got it all figured out. Unity has a cool built-in localization system to help out, and while it's somewhat new, it works very well. This is what it looks like once you get it all set up. Please forgive my pathetic translations, I mostly just use Google Translate to test, but you can see that I just need to place the text into this GUI and I can export them as a spreadsheet. The translators can fill this out and I can import it back into Unity. Some of them, like this one, can refer to other translations as a variable and change what is written depending on the gender of the item. So in this case, if the item in Spanish has a male ending, it'll use the male word, and if it has a female ending, it'll use the female word. I should also note that I am not starting translation yet, I'm just trying to get the system done so that I don't have to worry about it later on. Okay, so I finally got that working and got to move on to some other stuff. Besides designing NPCs, I also drew up some other areas and got some pollution drawn up. I implemented a whole pollution system so you can clean up the pollution with a little mop tool and it'll stay clean. Those little slime monsters will rise up out of the goop and attack if you get too close. You may have also noticed that I changed the jump animation to a walk animation. I didn't like how the jump made the game feel kinda goofy, I guess? Maybe that's not the right way to describe it. I guess it just made him look like a chess piece, which I think kinda took away from the experience of exploration. I kinda feel like I'm dragging this weird little guy around rather than actually being him and exploring the area. It's less immersive, and also a little weird. Why was he jumping? Didn't his knees hurt? There are just too many questions. And finally, the last change of the month, I added in the ability to place stuff on other stuff. Here you can see I plopped this window onto the wall here, which allows the light to come pouring in. It's a small change, but it needed to be documented nonetheless. And that, everyone, brings us to the end of this month's changes. I'll admit, at first I felt a bit underwhelmed by the progress. I did a lot of planning, but there isn't a lot to show for it visually. I'm hoping next month will be more interesting and hopefully a bit less draining. This was one of the first times in almost a year of working on this thing that I started to feel a bit discouraged about the amount of work that still needs to be done, but I'm just gonna keep trudging through and try to be methodical about how I progress. I know it'll be a grind, but I think we'll be able to do it and make our way through. So hey, thanks again for coming by. If you're interested in the game progress so far, feel free to hop on into the old Discord or wishlist on Steam to get notified on release. Of course, hitting that like, subscribe, or bell button goes a long way to get YouTube to like the channel and spread the word, so please consider doing so. And of course, don't be afraid to leave a comment. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions. I left out a lot of stuff for the sake of time, but I will be happy to answer them down below. So thanks again for coming, and I'll see you next time.